Welcome to Narrative's Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome Deroy and Julienne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
It's a real crisis, to both a cost crisis and an access crisis. There are health deserts in our country where you take months to get to a great provider, and that could be, a mental health crisis, that could be a physical crisis, and that actually raises the cost of care by not immediately creating great access quickly, particularly to folks that are in rural communities. And so we believe that the power of technology and virtual care and telehealth, as well as longitudinal or like whole person care, like treating the person, mind, body, and wallet, is important.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome Deroy, CEO of Narrative.
And I'm Julienne Ryan.
Very nice to see you, Julienne, as always. Before we move on to introducing our guest today, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast wherever you find your podcasts. Leave a review, because that gets word of mouth going. And also check out our YouTube channel. YouTube at Narrative is the name of our channel. And you'll be able to find episode notes and resources and many different links that are relevant to this conversation at narrative.com, narrativ.com/podcast. That's also where you can find all our previous episodes. We now have a library of more than 180 episodes at this point. So I highly recommend that you all check those out. So without further ado, I want to first of all thank everyone for listening today and welcome our guest, Jim O'Gorman, who's the Chief People Officer at Included Health, where he leads the talent and organization team, including HR operations, talent acquisition, and talent management. He's responsible for all aspects of the company's people strategy. Jim brings more than 25 years of human resource leadership experience, helping companies create award-winning cultures where people can do the best work of their careers. Prior to joining Included Health, Jim built and scaled teams through a variety of leadership roles at Hulu, TeleAtlas, TomTom, and the Obama-Biden re-election campaign team. He earned a BA in communications from Gannon University and an MBA from Northeastern University. Welcome to the show, Jim. Great to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. So I want to kick us off the way we always kick off the podcast and ask you the question. Could you tell us about an experience that has shaped who you are today, still informs your thinking in some way, influences you in some way?
For sure. I love this first question, which is, I think, unfortunately, a great unifier for everyone, which is I had a really terrible, horrific boss when I was in my 20s. Was 24, 25, and really worked for clinically terrible, narcissistic person. And that experience really affected me. It affected me while I was in it, in my self-confidence, how I was showing up. I was drinking a bottle of wine every night to sleep. I had so much anxiety going into work. I ended up quitting that job just in a moment of I think depression at the time, at 26, because it was so unhealthy. And the fact that one individual that had so much influence on my life and my day and just really has shaped me and who I am, how I show up for people, how I lead. And I think it's gotten me to where, now my whole work is, in the people strategy, in the people business. And I think that's probably the biggest catalyst that happened to me. And unfortunately, I think it's a common story for people.
Yes, and you're right in that respect. But good for you for taking a soul-crushing experiencing and repurposing it for good and for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can totally relate to that. I had a very similar experience in my 20s. Not necessarily that I had a terrible boss, but I was definitely in the wrong place, which I think is another sort of its own can create its own kind of torment for someone where you just know that there's something else for you, and yet you're sticking to the same place for all the wrong reasons, basically.
And,
Uh,
I think people forget, like, you have to have that job. Like, I was in my
mm,
20s, I had bills to pay, like, I had rent, and, like, you feel so trapped. But and so many people, including my father at the time, was horrified that I quit my job, like, on the spot. Um, but boy, that was so liberating to, like, not be so to, like, put myself first in that moment. And it's I think we forget the how much power a leader or a manager has over an individual.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I want to ask you about another formative experience that you and I talked about when we first met, and I mentioned it in there's a line in there in your bio, and that's your time on the Obama campaign. I'm curious how that kind of experience influenced the way that you lead today, even as a chief people officer.
Yeah, I was a volunteer first on the campaign, and because of my background in kind of GIS technology, there was an opportunity for me to join as a employed staff member in the state of California to help them in the state of California. But the real, like, inspirational moment was just being a volunteer on that campaign first, and then having the opportunity to become an employee because that campaign, Barack Obama was, you know just innovative. That campaign, the first campaign was so innovative in the art of storytelling. That's where you and I, connected. Is the power of understanding who you're talking to, how you're trying to engage a community, how you get personalized in that community. What are the issues of that community is different in one area, in one zip code, than a zip code that could be, 1, 2 miles, away from that, and using our own stories to connect with that community and to connect with the people in our community to engage them in conversation, in political conversation. I think it's just become more and more difficult over since that campaign to have discourse. And but I learned so much about the power of storytelling and how that actually unites everyone, that actually grounds us in, like, common values and common principles, regardless of kind of generation or political background or any kind of demographic situations, that the storytelling is what unites people and can have a more impactful and powerful conversation. And I learned that on the campaign, and it is fundamentally changed just kind of the work that I do, particularly around leadership development, management development, people development, is helping leaders really think about how to use stories to engage your team
Mm,
in the right conversation.
And part of that is putting yourselves in other people's stories in order to do that. And I think that was another example of what we saw in that campaign. They didn't make it just about their own perspective. They included people, and they were authentic in reaching out, and they did so many great de-escalations of situations that were coming up in audiences. And because they were to do that was because they recognized that person's situation and called for everybody to listen and engage appropriately.
Yeah. Well, and you used the right word, was authenticity. They did it.
Mhm.
They actually trained volunteer. I was trained in, like, how do you, like, come up, like, how do you really internalize what's important to you and talk about that, and to use it as a mechanism to connect, but to do it authentically, not as not so much as a political mechanism or like a influence mechanism, but as a true authentic point of connection. Um, and how they did that was amazing, but that authenticity then allowed them to create a wider tent, a broader tent for which they could have conversations and engage people. And I think people realized that and saw that.
yeah, yeah. I'm curious, Jim, because what you're talking about now, as being this sort of formative experience where you've witnessed and experienced for yourself the power of storytelling to unite people. How does that sort of translate because that's a campaign, national level, where there's a very clear message in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and who we're trying to elect, et cetera, and the kinds of things that people care about. When I think of that, of any political campaign, there's usually a set of values that people are driven by as candidates, and then whoever relates to those values are the people that you're going to attract, essentially. But I'm curious in terms of storytelling and values and culture, what your take is as someone who leads people or is in charge at least of creating systems that develop people, manage people, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. How does that experience sort of translate into what you've been able to do over your career?
Well, I think using storytelling, authentic storytelling, including the positive and the vulnerable negative stories, um, allows you to be a more authentic leader, a more personal leader, and creates both a sense of belonging and more safety within that team. If you can use your own examples of like how you're struggling, or how you evolved or learned, or took advantage of successes and opportunities, like it is both positive and constructive. um but then people see, um can see the relation, the connection, and you can be more relatable, and that instantly creates a stronger sense of belonging within the team. Once you have stronger sense of belonging, you have better conversation because there's more safety. They can trust me better because I'm more authentic as a leader. And that's where I think storytelling is so important. Authentic storytelling. I think I love, Julian, your word of authenticity, because I think it's so critical to the concept of storytelling.
Hmm. Yeah.
So tell me your entry into human resources and talent. I'd love to know how you brought that perspective with you and start to introduce it.
You know, HR found me.
Okay.
I went to human resources as like a tour of duty. I always thought I would be the chief
I
operating
love
officer.
that's
It's
my
like on the
phrase.
development plan, and that was tapped on the shoulder. There was an opportunity. There was a departure at the VP of HR level, and so my CEO at the time tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I'd like you to go take this role." I was in operations, and I looked at him cross-eyed. I was like, "I'm not going over there. Like, you're crazy." Um, that's just not who I was. And so I didn't think, but they were like, "Look, as far as your management development and leadership development, you need to know this function." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I get that logic." And so I did it as a tour of duty, and it obviously changed my career trajectory because I found this was where I'm supposed to be. And I think that goes back to my original story, of course, but the power of the chief people officer role in strategy. It's all about the people. No strategy, no business strategy they fail on execution of how the people actually execute and do the work. And I saw that really quickly at TeleAtlas through that HR opportunity. And even as I took other assignments and moved out of HR, um, later at TeleAtlas, I was like, "Oh, I'm in the wrong place." And even on the Obama campaign, I was in an operations role, and loved that work, but said I need to get back to my HR work. My I that was my it's my calling. I'm so grateful that by my late 30s, I knew exactly what I needed to be, and I don't have any other aspirations to other than the chief people officer role. It's kind of very satisfying.
Wonderful. That's a gift in itself. And it shows up in someone's work when they're not just phoning it in, that it really means something to them on
Yeah.
every level.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to touch on what included health does, but before I do, there's one thing that I wanted to get back to, which was because we've talked about authenticity and storytelling, and and we've mentioned, at least I think that's what I heard, is that leaders need to be able to tell these stories, vulnerable stories, and give an example, et cetera. Is it your kind of view that it's on the leaders to sort of set that example of telling potentially a vulnerable story, or a story where you don't maybe look that great, but there's a lesson to it that makes you more relatable, or do you think it's kind of on everybody to embrace this idea of vulnerability and authenticity?
I think it starts at leadership. It starts at the top. for sure. People mimic the behaviors of their leaders. Um, and I think like we have a leadership competency at Included Health of instilling trust. Like we know that in order to be an effective leader in this organization, you have to first be able to instill trust with your team. And how you instill trust with your team is you operate with integrity, you come in with authenticity, and you create a sense of um, you know credibility. And you do that through storytelling. You do that through like your own experiences and how you think and how you got to a decision, and providing context, and what principles you're using in that decision. So I think you have to start at the top in order to create trust with your team. And if you don't have trust with your team, you really can't go anywhere.
So, yeah, and as you're talking, so many scenes are flashing through my mind. And one of it is a gentleman who should remain nameless, charming, wonderful, but he didn't like bad news of any kind, which was pretty hard when you're in operations, not to let somebody know when something's not working or things aren't talking to each other in the system. So that was a big example of saying it's not leading with just hooray, life is great, we're making our numbers, but like to give the whole story literally and allow people to share it and really come together and fix things.
Totally. I mean,
Mm.
leadership is most important when things are tough or when there's obstacles. Like that's really where you need leadership to be at its finest. And so, in order to be that, you have to know when things are tough. And if people don't want to even communicate that to you, um, then what's the job?
Exactly. It's like, we got it.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
So yes, I think I mentioned to you, Jim, before the interview when we first met that the company that produces this podcast, Narrative, of which Julienne and I are part of, was born out of the HIV/AIDS crisis, and that's kind of when the founders of the company sort of saw the power of storytelling to affect change and bring about change for people who were highly marginalized, didn't really have a voice, and were even more marginalized because of the virus. And I think one of the reasons that I was attracted to you in the first place, and Included Health, was this sort of bold mission of I think it's accessibility, at least that's what I saw, and affordability. Really looking at that, and I wonder in terms of what you could tell us from your perspective about how the company lives this mission of making healthcare accessible and affordable. How does that sort of show up?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because it is obviously near and dear to my heart, which is our number one focus and mission is to raise the standard of healthcare for everyone, regardless of where they are in their healthcare journey, whether they're a caregiver or someone who's a patient and struggling with something, regardless like where they are economically, where they are geographically, where they are demographically, that they have the same access, quality care. And it's a real crisis, to both a cost crisis and an access crisis. There are health deserts in our country where you take months to get to a great provider, and that could be a mental health crisis, that could be a physical crisis, and that actually raises the cost of care by not immediately creating great access quickly, particularly to folks that are in rural communities. And so we believe that the power of technology and virtual care and telehealth, as well as longitudinal or like whole person care, like treating the person mind,
Mm.
body, and wallet, is important. And you do that through technology. You do that through, yes, virtual health, like getting therapists quickly to um, a patient, getting, specialists and primary care doctors quickly to a patient via technology when they need it. Really important. But most also important is navigating claims, navigating insurance complexities, navigating explanation of benefits. The insurance system is complicated, and it creates a lot of financial distress and financial stress on people, which only adds to their healthcare burden. And the two have to go hand in hand. And you do that through uh, our service, that Included Health.
That's great. How does that when you are sort of looking at your people, whether that's retention or recruiting, et cetera, engaging people at Included Health, how important is the mission of the company itself, like what you guys do in terms of attracting people or retaining people?
It's number one. It's our
Really?
highest engager. The mission, connecting to purpose, is our highest engagement factor in when we assess our employees and their own engagement, is their commitment to the mission and commitment to the vision. Um, and it's, we call it work worth caring about. And we attract people who want to change healthcare. I mean, healthcare is broken, full stop. The healthcare system is broken. And, we need to be the catalyst for change. We talk about our values of lead the way here, that's what we're trying to do. And we want to attract people who are engaged in that mission. It's a long mission. This is not a quick, if you're looking for a quick hit or a quick fix or a quick, equity boost, then we're probably not the right company for you.
Yeah.
And when you've been, because I'm sure you've gone through many different journeys about building this culture and this team, what stands out? It's important lessons about how you identify talent and saw them really develop into the employees that you wanted them to be, or the leaders you wanted them to be.
For us, it's being very values based. Like the mission drives the attraction. The values is what keeps the employee. To do this work, to disrupt healthcare, you have to put the member first. You can't put necessarily the payer first or the clinician first. It can be controversial, but we believe you put the member first, the patient first. Then all stakeholders around that will rise at the success of the patient by creating more healthier days for that member. And so putting the member at the center of our decision making, at the center of our services, at the center of our product is core to our values system. And we also say we want to embrace change and lead the way. And so someone who is not looking to be innovative or entrepreneurial or likes, steady 9 to 5 stability, like we have to be clear. Employers need to be clear in their own storytelling about who they are.
Sure.
We embrace change. We lead the way where paths have not been led. It's really important for us to say that out loud because that will attract a very specific individual. So we very carefully say we're not the employer for every employee that exists out there. We're an employer for people who want to raise the standard of healthcare, evidence-based care for everyone, and do it. Do the hard work because this will take time.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I so appreciate and want to highlight, how you lead with your values because it's been apparent the entire interview. I mean, I already have retained at least 3 of your values, leading the way, instilling trust. Of course, now I forget the third, but there was it embracing something? But anyway, and even this innovative entrepreneurial aspect. These are things that are going to stay with me just because it's clear that you're kind of walking that talk. And in so much of our work, I know, Julienne, you can relate to this, but, we walk into organizations where people will sort of say that they are, driven by their values. But then you actually see no or almost no evidence of that, particularly through the stories that employees might be telling or even the messages on the website, et cetera. It's more kind of the values are here on a page, they're here on a wall, they're here in a branding deck, for investors, whatever. And so I just want to highlight that for our listeners because I think this is something we often come back to on this podcast is the importance of living your values and actually showing that to the people that you're trying to attract, whether that's your employee, new employees or whether that's customers. I think across the board, there's not enough of that. So just wanted to highlight that for everyone.
And it's great. And I have a question on the back of that because you're creating culture and all the time, constantly consistent that moves forward. And it's not like it's going to happen today and then go away. In one of the things I was listening about your reading, you work virtually. Is that correct? A lot of your staff? Because we are in a situation where we were like, first we're in person, then we're hybrid, and then we're saying, what you're always, there's lots of value adds on both sides, but I was listening to something you were saying about that. And I think the audience would really appreciate your experience and how you've thought through where your humans are and when they bring the most value together and when you can let them go free and be in their own pods working away.
Yeah. I appreciate the question because I don't like the clickbait that exists and has existed over the last 3 years of in the office, calling people back into the office 2 days a week, 3 days. Like, you have to figure out who you are. I don't think it's a one size fits all. I cannot communicate what the best
Hmm.
setup is for any other company but my own, based
Correct.
on our values and who we are. And I think that's what some of the articles miss is there is not the silver bullet solution of whether you should be in person, whether you should be fully remote, whether you should be hybrid. You just first have to figure out who you are. And that is what we did is we said, well, look, if we're going to be leading the way in virtual care and creating access for people via virtual behavioral health, virtual primary care, virtual urgent care, then we have to be really great at working virtually. And it can't be just our clinicians that work virtually. Like, people have to understand that that's just kind of core to who we are. And so we made that commitment early on. I mean, the Included Health came together through a variety of acquisitions, to be honest with you. So it was like 3 acquisitions that came together in 2021. And we just made, and one company was fully remote, and another company was heavily in physical space. And we just made the decision, this is who we are going to be. I think that's fair to an employee to say, like, I think people want some consistency. So we are 93% remote. We still have an office in San Francisco. We are intentional. We still believe in community and connection. We got rid of our lease on physical space, but we took some of that savings and put it into T&E and travel and entertainment budget. We set some travel expectations for people and for leaders, and we want in-person events are important. Intentional, programmed, planned intentional events are important, and we've kind of stuck with that. But it does come back to having clear values.
Hmm.
And we have values that are applied to all of our employees that we live. They're not posters on the wall. We measure them through 6-month surveys. We award them. We incentivize them. We're doing right now our 10 days of appreciation at the end of the year, where we're celebrating 10 people in each value and how they displayed that specific value in action this year. And we award them and recognize them and celebrate them. So I think it's really important that you see this in your day-to-day culture. And then we have our leadership competencies, and that goes back to instilling trust, because you have to trust your leader, you have to trust your employees, whether you're in a physical space, whether you're in a hybrid space, or whether you're in a remote space. Like, you've got to create systems and structure to trust people to do their jobs and to be clear on what your expectations are of them in any space. And I think what's missing for people when they make that decision is, how are they creating that trust with their employee that they're able to execute and do their work regardless of where they sit. And for some organizations, that's really hard to do
Hmm.
based on the work that they do. And for other organizations like ours, it was something that we saw a possibility and we thought we could lead the way with. And we've just kind of we've stayed steady in that state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. And what you've done just now is also, I appreciate that you gave us some concrete examples of the types of things that you do in terms of appreciating employees, because that's one of the reasons we have this podcast, is so people feel like they're taking something away that's very practical. So hopefully we're also giving ideas to people in terms of how do we actually show our values in action. And I love that you have a way of measuring that, and that your people's performance is actually measured against that too.
Yeah, I want to add there too. Like, it's
Yeah.
easy to say, it's like we lead with our values, but I think also when you choose your employer, when it comes back to my original story, you also have to
Mm,
know what you are, what are your values,
yes.
and does your values align with this company? And we use Hogan. There's a Hogan values assessment. We had all of our leaders after acquisition, the top of the house, go through this assessment to say what's the values of our leader. Because if you have values that aren't authentically the values of your leaders, then you are automatically starting on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
Mm,
And then people need to do the Hogan assessment, understand what their values are. Maybe they do like more of a command and control culture, or, a less altruistic culture than ours. Maybe there is
Mm.
more stability and they don't like change, but they have to figure out what their values are. And then a company has to like assess their leader. Are their leader, do who you want to be as values? And there are mechanisms to survey this and to understand that. And I would encourage people not just to talk about values, but actually learn through assessment what their values are and what the values of their leaders are.
Yeah, and just to point out for people who aren't familiar with Hogan assessments, we'll definitely have a link to that in our resources in the episode notes, because I think it's worth checking that out. We're big fans of assessments and figuring out who you are,
Who you
so
are.
that yeah, exactly, figuring out who you are in this moment. By the way, because we do change. I mean, our values remain pretty solid, but new ones occur to us as we have more experience. We're getting up to the time where sadly it's time to land this plane. But before we end the episode, I want to make sure I give you the floor, Jim, one more time for anything else that you'd like to leave with our audience. You've already given us many great nuggets about the healthcare industry and what you do and what it's like for you to do what you do and what it's like to work in your organization. So thank you for all of that. But is there anything else that you would like to leave with our audience at this moment?
Well, I just want to double down on storytelling, the work that you've done, what brought us together to talk, because I think we struggle today with debate and discourse in our work, in our workplaces, and in society. I think that is really unfortunate. And I think the way to improve here is through storytelling and curiosity and asking good questions and getting the stories out of people. And there are really, you provide great resources to do that. And I would encourage leaders, particularly, to do more of that, to build the muscle of debate and discourse within organizations will allow society to be better at discourse and debate as well. And it's an area that I think corporate America, I think it's an area that CHROs can play a difference in. And I just would want to move people in that direction, that there's beauty in debate and discourse.
One of the words that surfaced when I was researching you before this was you used the word context. And that's a wonderful word to go in parallel with storytelling, because stories show how you show up. It also gives context. Doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with everything. Their leaves, they go, now I get it. That's
Now I
what's
get how
informing
we're
your journey.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes a difference.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for those great words, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Yes, let's double down on
It's
storytelling.
what connected us. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yes.
absolutely. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know our listeners do as well. And thank you, Julienne, for being my wonderful
Thanks. It's a pleasure.
co-host, as always. As Jim said, I want to encourage everyone to go to the Narrative website, narativ.com, because you will find lots of resources there. We are actually, we've now launched a series of leadership story talks live events where we have people telling stories about the experiences that have shaped who they are. That happens every other month on the third Thursday. So look for those in our calendar of events. It's a great way to kind of dip your toes in storytelling as well and just hear real stories from real people. There's even an open mic slot now, so so you can even try it out yourself. And of course, don't forget to leave a review wherever you find your podcast, because that drives the word of mouth, and we want as many people as possible to hear the words of wisdom of Jim and many other people like him. So thank you once again. I know, Julienne, you've got something to say.
No, well, you said that whole series is like our wish come true, because we keep talking about building community. And my constant comment at the end of most interviews is it wasn't long enough. I had more things to learn and say and think about. So now we're bringing people back so they get to share their stories in a great way.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much now, Jim, for being part of our community. And
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, you're welcome. And thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.